Hi, I'm Mitchell Ledbetter. I'm doing my final, it's going to be over South Park. I'm going to be showing you my slides over my phone. They're going to be upside down, so I'll be submitting my slides into you personally. But yeah, so decided to choose South Park because it was a show that I've grown up watching. I've watched it since sophomore year of high school, and it just has a lot of very, very good points about school and about life, and as it comes across in some semi immature way, it does really get good views out, and it kind of tackles a lot of subjects that most modern shows will not touch. And I will be kind of reaching a lot of that in this presentation. So, what is South Park? South Park is a show that takes place in Denver, Colorado. It is a show. It shows a lot of social points in our society and world as a whole, in a comedy-filled, immature way. It takes dark twists with most of its points, but a lot of its views show to be way too close to home. So, in the sense of how South Park is as a show, it has been able to tackle a lot of things that modern society is facing. Like, it just did a huge movie about COVID and how it has affected everyone, and how it's kind of still kind of going on, and they look through a lot of different specific points and a lot of views of like through the kind of eyes of a child, but also in the eyes of an adult. In the show, it tackles a lot of like views of like what it'd be like to be a superhero, or how it is to play a lot of these games, but then it also tackles racism, sexism. I'm gonna talk about transgender in this because there's a whole episode about that. uh it tackles the views of a liberal, a Republican, a conservative, a Democrat, everything. Any political view, any non political view, the eyes of sports, anything. Anything that you can imagine that has been talked about in society, there has most likely been an episode of South Park going through their views on it in the immature, funny way that it is. So the show kind of stars a little kid named Cartman, and that kid is evil. He does anything underhanded or whatever to get his way in any certain situation. And we'll be starting out with transgender identity that gets tackled in season 18, episode 3. In the episode, it tackles the big topic of transgender. Cartman comes out as a transgender, and his reasoning for doing it is not something I fully support, but the topic itself is important. He comes out as a transgender because there's a huge problem for the bathrooms where he doesn't feel like he's able to get a stall to use the bathroom. So he's like, I'm gonna use this loophole, and he was decided to come out as transgender, which is an insensitive way to do it. But I mean, it gives us a good idea of like a school view of like how to react to it. Their reaction was they ended up doing gender neutral bathrooms. And in these gender neutral bathrooms, he was the only transgender. So he was able to take the transgender bathroom for himself. So he ended up getting his way in that sense, which ends up getting forwarded by another character who does exactly what he does, right back to him. But it's the idea of having a transgender bathroom for the specific transgender kids, so you're not looking through different problems. Like, if he's a male transforming into a female, the problem with other girls in the bathroom and him being in there, because there's some messed up people that would do a lot of horrible things in that scenario, or a transgender woman coming out as male. There would be some problems in the guy's bathroom as well with them in there, and it was a good solution to a very modern problem, and I supported it 100%. I don't like the reasoning for why he did it, but I understand the reasoning, and that's how the school should be going about it. Next up, they talk is a huge thing in social class. Instead of doing an episode for this one, I'm going to talk about a specific character. His name is Kenny. Kenny is one of the main characters in the show of South Park, and he is very, very poor. He does not have a lot of money. He's grown up in a very, very dirt poor household, and he has no way to go about his scenario. But in the eyes of school, he's not treated any differently because he's poor. He doesn't get the less opportunities because he's poor. His friends and his teachers have helped him out a lot in the show with him, and that's how it should be. In the book, it talks about social class and how that just because someone is dirt poor does not mean that they should be treated differently as a student, but you should help them out financially with the small things like pens, pencils, notebooks, folders, like just helping them out in the little ways can help it go a long way in becoming a good student to the school. And they do a pretty good job at keeping him in check just from him being poor. They understand he's poor, but they don't treat him as a different kid just because he's poor. And that's the last thing you would want as a student, is to be treated differently and be treated unfairly, whether good or bad, just because of your social class. The next topic is racial diversity, where in this show there is none. A character I will be talking about is Token. Token, his name is Token Williams, and Token was a runoff on the idea of the token black kid. And in that school, there's just no diversity. He's the only black kid in the entire school, regardless of gender. And the school is split up very, very, very odd. It is like 94% Caucasian. There's 6.9% is Asian, and then that remaining 0.1% is literally just Token, as him being the only black guy in that school. And he's not getting treated unfairly because of his race. He didn't get treated differently in the school system because of his race. He just got put in a scenario where he was just in a very, very white school, and there's no diversity at all. There's very little to any in that entire school. So it just kind of comes down to him in a situation where he's not really getting bothered by the considering fact that he's the only black kid in the school. And in the book, it talked about there's a lot of schools that are 80% Caucasian, and the remaining percent is any diversity, not just black. Like, there's not a lot of diversity. I mean, most of America is white. As we are one of the more diverse countries, we are still like 50% white and then 50% everything else. Like any other race. I hope that didn't sound insensitive when I said it like that, but that's not how I meant to come across. Next up is globalization. In season 19, episode 2, they kind of go into this idea of teachers kind of not really having their own curriculum. They kind of were able to teach whatever they want whenever they wanted. And in the episode, there's a whole part about Mr. Garrison not really supporting immigrants coming to the country. It's a messed up topic, but it was kind of said in the show, and he got upset how immigrants were able to freely come into the country. So what he does is he changes his entire topic plan from that view into talking about all the things that are happening in America right now, with how immigrants can just come to America and they're stealing jobs in his eyes, and he's wrongfully teaching kids about a political view, and they're way too young to understand it, but they have to sit there and listen because the teachers are able to do whatever they want whenever they want, and the curriculum doesn't affect it. It doesn't change anything. It just kind of forcing them into that situation where they kind of have to sit back and listen. It's unfair to the kids. And in the book, it talks about a lot of ideas of curriculum, like how it's not a bad idea to let the teachers teach how they want, but they need to get a certain amount of topics in there. And while Mr. Garrison does a decently good job getting the math part in there, him going off a tangent in the math section of the class to talk about immigrants, and the thing he was talking about is like why uh ancient Rome went to crap. He didn't say it like that, but I'm not gonna cuss on this. Um, and it was just a very unfortunate view on how it was supposed to look. And then last is disabilities. The show takes a nice little turn with disabilities and how there's two students that have them in the school. Jimmy, we'll start with him. Jimmy is a kid that grew up without being able to really use his legs. His legs are in a sense useless in the eyes of they just don't work, so he has to get around using his crutches. He also has a little bit of a mental disability in the eyes of his very troublesome stuttering problem and how he can process things. But he's one of the smartest kids in the school, and he's very intelligent, and he's very good at what he's able to do for the school in his own intelligence. And then they have Timmy. Timmy is a kid that's mentally disabled to a point where he is unable to use anything from he can use his arms, his head, but nothing from the torso down. He doesn't have any use for it. He's just not able to use that part of his body, and he is mentally disabled to a point where he can only get one word out that's understandable, and it's his own name. There's been a couple scenarios where the school has provided him a way of communication through a computer, kind of like how what Stephen Hawking has, because the kid's very, very smart, but he's just unable to get that intelligence out because he can only fathom the words Timmy, and that's all he's able to say. But neither of them have been treated unfairly in the school system because of their disabilities. They've actually been treated pretty fairly, and they aren't taken out of class. Which in the book it talks about how mostly kids with disabilities are put in their own classrooms to learn and take in the knowledge themselves rather than being able to communicate with the kids and make friends in that sense. And while Jimmy isn't a main character, he's one of the main characters. He always hangs out with the main core four of Stan, Cartman, Kenny, and Kyle. He's usually in that group somewhere. Just being able to contribute and hang out with those guys and have friends. And I can honestly say that the main reason for that is that he's not taken out of class because of his disability. He is still able to learn in just the same scenario and is treated pretty fairly in the sense of just because he has a disability doesn't mean he is lesser than the community. And here's the slide. Remember, I'll be sending these slides into you separately. But South Park is a very, very immature and dark show. It's not for the light-minded. But it goes into a lot of important topics in our society. It goes into things it's very, very modern. It's very real because it touches everything. It touches drug abuse, sexism, racism, as I brought up earlier, the disabilities that I brought up earlier. It brings in gang violence. It brings in police brutality. It talks about everything, anything that you can imagine. It's a very, very, it's a very good show. And while school isn't the main point of the show, it does touch a lot of it. They have a principal that's named PC Principal, and his point in the show is to make sure that you're not offending other people, because offending people is a big, big problem in today's society, where you really have to watch what you say and what you post because it could offend another person. So he kind of puts in another view of trying to make sure that you don't offend other people. Like he was the main reason that Cartman was able to get his own bathroom when he became out as transgender, because it's offensive to disrespect that. And I think it's just a very down to earth show, and I would recommend it if you haven't watched it.